Today is Victory in Europe Day.
Just as I have a dream.
A salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela.
And Mrs. Thatcher.
Hello, welcome to Systems Reimagined. Today I'm joined by Samuel Moore in the flesh and Rachel Duffy, who is currently back at uni. And we're going to be unpacking some of the biggest stories of the past week, starting off with the free school meals fiasco, which we all saw unfold over the past week, including some back and forths with during Prime Minister's question time. We're going to discuss the success of the vaccine rollout in the UK, as well as some more Brexit updates with regards to workers' rights violations. Finally, we're going to turn to a little bit more of an internationalist outlook and look at the Ugandan elections, which just went down. And finally, go to the US to look at Joe Biden's U-turn on $2,000 checks for the American people. With that being said, as always, like, subscribe, and all that jazz if you enjoy our content and want us to grow and things like that. And yeah, Rachel, I think it's up to you to take us off.
Thank you. So I'm sure that everyone will be aware of the free school meals fiasco. So Tuesday last week, we saw a lot of images being circulated online on Twitter and Facebook of parents who went to collect their free school meal food hamper for their children and were frankly shocked by what they received. Now, there's some variance between these hampers, whether they were to feed one meal for one child for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, but the consistent theme throughout was that the food was not adequate, and it was certainly nowhere near enough to feed those children anywhere near the standard that they would receive at school if they were receiving the free school meals, or even just normally during the holidays. So a lot of MPs on both sides of the House, it's fair to say, were very, very kind of shocked and appalled by this, and they put it to Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. Now, he said that he was shocked and appalled, and an investigation would be launched into the private company that was supplying these free school meals, or lack thereof, really. But I think it does again come down to the fact that it has been outsourced to a private company who are there to make a profit, and this could be seen by the fact that it was supposed to equate to, correct me if I'm wrong, around £30. And people did a kind of quick look at what the items were, and I won't kind of go back over them because I'm sure we've all seen the pictures, but it came to really no more than about £6. Even when the company kind of addressed the cost of manufacturing and paying wages and things, it was still coming to like £10. So it was woefully short, woefully inadequate, which Boris himself has said. And again, Starmer did a good job of kind of pressing him about this, but he was quick to come to the defense of free school meals, and it's a continuing theme. So I'm not sure what you two both think about that, but clearly a huge story, and there's not much one can say apart from like the fact that it's really awful.
Yeah, I think it's shocking, and it just goes into this general theme of how the Conservatives, I feel like, have this reluctance to try to feed some of the lowest income families, or like their children, I guess. Throughout this whole pandemic, we've seen it with Marcus Rashford's, rightly so, campaigning for increased free school meals, etc. But something I do want to draw attention on quickly is one of these clips that Matt Hancock had on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, and it shows how they're discussing this free school meals fiasco, and he's very reluctant to kind of say that he regrets not voting for free school meals previously. And although I could see how people are like, oh, that's trying to be a gotcha moment and stuff, but at the end of the day, Matt Hancock, who as we'll see now, was banging on about how proud he was about the free school meals being rolled out, all that kind of stuff. If he actually genuinely feels that way, he should have no problem saying, oh, I was at fault for not voting for free school meals, I regret it. So yeah, anyway, I'll just play that for you guys now.
I want to see good, high quality food. I'm really glad that we're able to send out food for those who receive free school meals when schools are in, and I'm really glad that we're able to do that when schools are out.
If you're that glad, can I just ask you a difficult question? Why did you vote against it?
Well, I'm really glad we were able to put it into place.
Yeah, but if you're that glad about being able to put it into place, again, why did you, as Health Secretary, vote against this?
Well, because the reason that I'm glad now is because we've been able to sort that out and put it in place.
Well, the reason you're glad now is that you got shamed.
No, thanks to you.
Let's be honest, you got shamed into it by a football player, a young football player with a conscience, who managed to prick the conscience of you and the government. Do you regret now, given how glad you are that it's now happening, do you regret voting against it?
Well, of course, I'm pleased that we're making sure that.
That wasn't the question. I just asked if you regretted. But hang on, it's a very important question because you wouldn't have done it without Marcus Rashford campaigning. My question for you is, given how glad you now are that it's happening, do you regret voting against it? It's a yes or no.
Well, as I say, I'm really glad that it's happening now.
But do you regret it? Do you regret voting against it?
Well, I'll put it this way. In the first lockdown, we took this action. And now, as you say, we're in
Health Secretary, you only have to say yes or no, whether you regret it. You either regret it or you don't.
Well, I'm really glad that the situation's been resolved.
Okay. So you regret voting against it?
I'm really glad it's been resolved and we've sorted it out. I'm going to use my own words to describe my own feelings on this one.
So you won't answer the question?
Well, it's that I'm answering the question, and I'm really glad that we've sorted.
Well, let's just hope going forward we don't rely. Let's just hope we don't have to rely, as we have to again this week, on Marcus Rashford to once again expose the iniquity of this system, because these kids are in lockdown, they're suffering, they're hungry, and they need support, and they need proper support from you as Health Secretary and the government. Thank you for joining us.
We're back in a moment.
And the good thing is, Piers, that's what we're delivering, and we're sorting out this problem. And ministers in the Department for Education who run this policy have spotted this, acted on it fast, seen the company.
Yeah, but Gavin Williamson, to nobody's surprise, Gavin Williamson didn't spot it before it was put on social media.
And as you guys saw there, very, very reluctant to really admit that he was wrong in that regard. But something I'll say just before I lead off to Samuel here is that I think it's important to consider the framing of this free school meal debate and how it's been implemented and rolled out. So during the first time which Rashford got free school meals, kind of passed through Parliament, stuff like that, it came in the form of vouchers essentially, right? And this was really it was £15, I believe, per voucher, and there was a slander campaign against these vouchers, saying that these families are just going to use it to buy drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, all this kind of stuff, right? Ludicrous argument, because in the free school meal vouchers themselves, you couldn't even buy any products which were like age prohibited or age restricted or whatever it may be. And so first of all, that's just one aspect of it, and this kind of, I guess, would be a reason, maybe not the main reason, but one of the reasons why they went to this privatization, outsourcing of these hampers, I would say. And so you kind of see and this also led to an issue, right, as Rachel pointed out. So all in all, I'd say this whole debate is really frustrating, because I'm sure there's good ways to go about this, and the one way which you went about it was slander by the media, and then the other way was outsourcing, which was inadequate. So I guess we'll get into a bit more discussion later about how to actually deal with this issue. But anyway, that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, I remember after the whole disaster in the summer with Rashford and the free school meals. I remember for the second time to extend the free school meals, there was still a reluctance from the Tories, and I remember saying that that baffled me, because after getting such bad PR in the summer, to now just still being reluctant and continue to dig their heels in with not extending these free school meals, I thought it was political suicide, and it was just, I think it's embarrassing. And now this further reluctance to extend it further, as we are still suffering with this coronavirus crisis. I just don't understand the thought process. It just not only because I understand their their belief system. I think the conservatism in them kind of prohibits them of it allows them to be more reluctant for handouts and what they consider handouts. But I mean, the third time around now, they're still reluctant to continue to extend this free school meal. I just don't understand. Just on the optics of it, like they might not believe it, but surely for their own political gain, they would just accept it because it is popular within the population and it does affect so many people. And I think most people just view it as something that's just like cruel. So I just don't understand from a politics point of view why they don't extend it and yeah, and also with this whole the whole issue around the privatization of of outsourcing the free school meals. I think it's just a disaster. I mean, if we can look at a country, for example, like Finland, since 1948, they've had a system where people between the ages of 6 and 16 receive free school meals, And I'm not saying you have to be like Finland, but there's so many countries around the world who have comprehensive systems to at least subsidize food for students. And I just think this outsourcing, there's always going to be a consequence because, as we know, with a lot of private companies, they do cut costs wherever they can, and just giving them the responsibility to provide £30 worth of food is always going to be a recipe for disaster, as we've seen with the images that are circulating around the web. Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, it just baffles me, how they continue to dig their heels in and continue to, especially in the biggest economic crisis for decades, how they still so stubborn about this issue. It just blows my mind. So yeah, I think it's just nothing else to say. It's just mind blowing that they're still so stubborn about this issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think on that point, it is just crazy. Obviously, the government will have to take decisions that aren't necessarily vote winners, and not every decision that they can take fiscally or in any other sense can be widely really popular. But I think that this one is just so ludicrous. I really don't understand, for an administration that is so keen on kind of the spin and their kind of press affairs and things, to see how widely unpopular it is. The issue aside, on principle, of the fact that you should be feeding those going hungry in the fifth richest economy in the world, if you just kind of pop that to the side for a moment, if you can, to look at it in terms of why they would fail to do that, and why every kind of new half-term holiday or Christmas holiday or Easter or summer, you've got to have this back and forth between a footballer and the government about whether you'll provide that support. I really don't understand. And time again, it's led to U-turns. It is just such an easy thing to get right, I would say. Also, I think it is worth mentioning that in terms of some of the suggestions that Labour are making, there is a fair critique of those. A good amount of Labour MPs have come forward and said that parents should just get cash in the hand, and they should then be able to go and buy whatever they need, whatever food their children need, and it's up to them to decide what's nutritious and what that food goes on. Although in practice, it's obviously a very good thing, because it would really highlight the trust that the government had in parents, which I think we're seeing an absence of in terms of giving them hampers or giving them specific vouchers. Schools have come forward and said, listen, at a time like this, we have enough going on in terms of online teaching and just acclimatizing to this whole new system and the layers of bureaucracy that they're already having to deal with. They weren't keen on the idea of then also getting checks from the government and distributing that cash to those parents that need it. So I think it is worth mentioning that although Labour have been quite effective in holding the government to account on this issue, which they absolutely should be, it would be difficult not to, some of their countermeasures aren't maybe the most effective, but I think overall, obviously, it's just something that needs an inquiry. But really, like, inquiry aside, just more, like, better food needs to be provided and more of it.
I'll quickly just go on the optics of it. So first of all, in terms of just how it looks, like, it's not like conservatives right now, the Conservative Party, just after they've announced this third lockdown, you have your deaths reaching new highs and things like that. They're not leading in the polls right now. A recent poll just came out that I think Labour was up had a margin of 4 points or something along those lines. So they're not leading in the polls, right? I mean, to be fair, Labour should be up way more than they are, considering the performance of the Conservatives with coronavirus. But that aside, so this would be a really easy thing to, like, get right, to be in the good books of voters, right? And they just failed on that. Also, again, I'd also want to mention that the company which this contract was outsourced to, that's its parent company, was used to be headed by the chair of that company was a ex-Tory donor. So there's a link there in terms of how that money got, why the contract was awarded there. And as we know, a lot of the Conservatives' friends have been awarded contracts. I think there was a study done which showed that there were people who knew Conservatives in government or something along those lines were 8 times more likely to get contracts during this pandemic. And yeah, just with regards to the actual solutions that's being proposed, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I'd be in favor of a cash in hand solution. I don't understand why the vouchers was a bad idea personally. Like, this may just be something I'm not aware of. But yeah, I didn't understand why that's not a good solution for the time being. But just thinking more broadly, we're going to have someone on this either next week or the week after, who's from this organization called the National Food Service, to discuss how they're trying to combat this issue of hunger in the UK, or food insecurity, shall I say. And what they're trying to do is build communal centers, which allow for food to be given to people at affordable prices or for free, depending on where you are. And I think in the long term, a strategy like that maybe, or a publicly funded body similar to the NHS for food could be an interesting thing to discuss, just in terms of a policy proposal, because this stuff can't, like, I don't want to live in a society where you have 10%, I believe, of people are food insecure. Like, that's not a place I want to live in, right? So we need to do something to combat this. And the way we do it is definitely up for debate, but that's just one option which I've seen floated around on Twitter, at least, and just other parts of kind of the left-wing news bubble, shall I say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also excited to have a guest on the show next week to discuss possible solutions and how we can deal with food insecurity. But yeah, going back to what you're saying about the Cantowa and their origins and their donations to the Tory party, it just seems like a continuation of what we've seen so far in the pandemic, with the outsourcing going to companies that have certain connections to the Tory party. So yeah, it's just a continuation of that issue. And I'm not sure if you guys saw the photos, but do you see the photos of their catering, like, for private schools in comparison to the hampers that the normal schools, public schools are getting? It's just crazy. Like, the private schools have all this gourmet cooked food, like, very neat, and they're like, the hampers is like a half cut tomato, and I'm like, it's just like, I don't know how they could go ahead with this. I don't understand. Surely they could have seen this and understood how bad this would look on their part. So yeah, it's just a crazy situation. And yeah, I wonder, if there'll be any significant change. I'm sure you would have to think that surely there'll be changes into how, like, the hampers will be done and the distribution, and making sure that you're getting your money's worth. But yeah, it's just crazy. And yeah, I mean, as you were saying about the vouchers versus handing money, or getting hampers. Yeah, I don't know the answer of that, but I think, from what I see, I think vouchers could be an interesting option, because, as you said, kind of places trust in the hands of the people, and making and they choose what they can purchase themselves, like, because it is not nice. There's not much dignity in just receiving food that you have no say in receiving. So I think I do think vouchers could be an interesting, way to do it. So yeah, I mean, let's see how it goes moving forward. But I just don't understand how they have yet to avoid these easy issues that I think are bipartisan with conservatives and more left wing. Yeah, just a bit of a disaster, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think just to add on to the kind of voucher conversation, I agree in that I think it's certainly a good alternative, but there's just no like easy fit solution to this. Obviously, the kind of pre-packed hampers are failing. We've outlined how the cash in hand, as it were, is not a really viable alternative. And also with the vouchers, I think again, critics have said how it like removes a level of trust from parents again, that it's not cash, it's vouchers that have to be like spent in specific food supermarkets on specific items. But I think it is probably more viable in terms of at least like parents are able to have some say over what food is bought. Like there were issues about kind of like children being vegetarian or like parents kind of not like seeing the nutritional value of some things, and they're still like receiving tuna and meat and things. So there's certainly no easy fit solution, but yeah, I think vouchers may be a better way forward and just remove some of the power from those private companies and put it into parents' hands. Because it's really not working at the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if we've kind of said all we wanted to express on that, we'll move on to the UK's vaccine rollout, which was another big topic of PMQs on Wednesday. Now, as we've kind of mentioned before, we're often very open about critiquing when things aren't going too well, but the vaccine rollout so far is being very, very effective. Logistically speaking, it's very successful. And this evening saw Sir Simon Stevens, who's the NHS chief executive, quote that a huge 140 jabs are being delivered every minute in the UK. So clearly quite a milestone. I think today as well we saw reported that half of all over 80s now have been vaccinated. A lot of care staff in, kind of care homes and the social care sector also receiving their vaccinations. So it's good news in terms of hopefully getting more back to normality. I think probably mid-Feb is a little optimistic, certainly by March, as some of those later vaccines are taking effect. But this does come off the back of 671 deaths today, which on a Sunday, considering a weekend lag, is still a huge number. And a further, I think it was around 35,000 new cases, again, just today. And this has also, again today, been met with Sir Simon Stevens saying that hospitals have seen a 75% increase in the amount of patients that they're treating with COVID than we did in the first peak in April. So a lot more COVID positive patients are being admitted, around 1 every 30 seconds, new research has suggested, especially in those worst hit areas. So it's clearly not something that's kind of under control just yet. Like a lot of hospitals are reporting being at breaking point. We mentioned last week about those temporary morgues and things in the south and southeast. And although that does come with cases starting to level off slightly, where those initial peaks were seen more in the south, it's not something that's been seen nationwide. Like those figures are still climbing in a lot of the northern regions, across Wales. So although there's that slight glimmer of hope in terms of the vaccination, it's certainly not a wholly positive picture with COVID right now.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to go?
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think as you said, I think it is positive news in which the manner they go in about this and being effective in vaccinating people. And I think maybe this could do with, for example, like the vaccines such as like the Oxford and AstraZeneca one, which is much easier logistically speaking to store and ship to people. So perhaps like a more, like this eases the burden and the logistics to delivering these vaccines to different medical centers around the UK. So it definitely is a positive, and hopefully continues in this trajectory. And I think as you were talking about like the fatalities and such a big amount of cases these past few weeks, I think we need to use this success in the vaccine rollout to communicate to people that we're nearly there. You know, we reaching the point where millions are going to get vaccinated in the next few months. So this should give people further incentive to behave better and, you know, follow the rules in a more stricter manner. So I definitely think, I mean, I'm sure and the government is doing this to a certain degree, but I definitely think they should emphasize, you know, we are nearing an end, you know, and we should definitely, you know, be considerate in how we behave. So I think, yes, it's overall good news, and I definitely think it should be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just I'll say I'm all for this this vaccine rollout. You know, I'm really happy that's going well, and also a little bit sad because I made a bet with I forgot who now, but actually I said on my Instagram, I think, that if the conservatives managed to reach their goal of vaccination, like vaccinations that they want to do, I would shave "I love the Tories" into my head. So yeah, personally, although I'm happy that, you know, they're actually getting this vaccine rollout going, a little bit sad that I might have to walk around for a couple of weeks with enshrined into my head, you know. But no, I think it's great. Like, I'm really happy that this is happening, and I think it is just a shame that obviously you have so many people dying right now. The numbers are really tragic. We reached over 100,000 deaths, the other day, which is a really tragic milestone. We have the sixth worst death rate per capita in the world right now, which again is not really good. We're higher than the U.S., which is insane. But like, you know, I don't want to say that's what's happened in the past, but I guess in some sense it is. Like, what's happened. So we do have to look forward, and it is good that they're vaccinating all these people, and it's something which Keir Starmer as well has been quite supportive of. So I mean, that's good at least. So yeah, I really hope they carry on this trajectory, to be honest. Anything else to add, Rachel?
No, I don't think so. I think just to echo those points, it'll certainly be interesting, that new haircut, if you have to get it.
Yeah, literally. No, yeah. But yeah, so I think we're gonna move on to some Brexit workers' rights updates, things like that. So there's a article published by the Financial Times, I believe it was sometime this week, and it was speaking about basically the business sector is trying to basically cut out some worker protections which are enshrined into EU law. So this includes the 48-hour work week, and as well as, you know, tweaking rules around rest breaks and not including overtime pay when calculating holiday pay entitlements. And one government spokesperson, I just quoted in the article, said the UK has one of the best workers' rights record in the world, which I'll first of all, before I get to kind of the bulk of that, in terms of the main point from that, right, that the EU, that the UK is trying to, you know, strip away some workers' rights to essentially get what you would assume to be a competitive advantage. I just want to go on the point of the UK has one of the best workers' rights record in the world, because that is like empirically false. There was a report published by the International Trade Union Confederation, which marked the UK as regular offenders of workers' rights, and they were in the same category as countries like Liberia, Madagascar, Morocco, Mauritius, Mozambique, Nepal. I believe there's only two other European countries. Only two other European countries in that ranking. So that's just not true in terms of workers' rights violations. But no, just going to the bulk of it, whether this will actually come to like actually get passed, I'm not too sure, because it could. I mean, stripping workers' rights will give the UK competitive advantage, which the EU has, you know, obviously said that it doesn't want, because that'll undermine the integrity of the single market, all that stuff. But, you know, I guess I kind of want to. I guess that's kind of that's the main points in terms of the actual. You know, is this actually going to be is that actually going to work in the first place, this attempt? But I want to speak about more the intent of this, the intent of stripping away workers' rights and stuff like that, and speak a little bit about kind of the legacy of a lack of trade unions power, I feel like, in the UK right now, and and the increasing gig economy that we have in the UK, because I feel like those are two central aspects to the labor market right now. I'm sure Samuel and Rachel, you also probably have quite differing opinions and interesting opinions on this. But yeah, I mean, just with regards to trade unions, like, trade union membership since the 70s has been on a decline. This obviously, correlates with kind of Thatcher being in charge and stuff like that. And her waging of, I guess, war, some people would say, on trade unions. And as well as, so that's one aspect of it that I want to speak about, that we had a decline in union membership over the past couple of decades. And as well, at the same time, we've been seeing a growth in this gig economy, which prevents people from really unionizing with these 0-hour contracts and things like that. So now that's roughly 10% of the workforce is part of the gig economy, which, look, 10% doesn't sound like that many people, right? But it's doubled in 4 years. So we can only imagine that this is something which is going to keep on increasing slowly but surely. And just other things like this idea of union power and gig economy kind of taking over, I guess, lack of union power and the economy kind of taking over, is mirrored by things like real wage growth, which has declined since the 70s, for example. Just as we said about workers' rights violations. So I just wonder what you guys' thoughts on that. What your thoughts on it is, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I can quickly go into it. So I'll first look at just specifically talking about the Britain and the EU and that relationship. I think I'm not really surprised by these developments that the Britain is trying to strip certain workers' rights that are present within the EU, because I mean, if you look at the negotiations, the main source of conflict between the UK and Europe, like you said, Benji, is about making sure that the UK doesn't get an advantage by stripping certain rights that make business more attractive and investment more attractive. So as you said, I think it's interesting to see if these will they'll be able to put these laws into practice, because as you said, if the UK does implement these laws, then then the EU is allowed to implement tariffs for the UK. So this adds a barrier of difficulty for business and trade. So yeah, as you said, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And just looking at the economy in general, I think as you can see, when it comes to productivity and wages, you see productivity and wages, until like the 80s, it was more or less around the same rate, as productivity grew, wages grew accordingly. But in the 80s, as we know, especially in the UK and the US, it was really like the birth of neoliberalism and kind of the stripping of workers' rights, the decimation of unions. And as you can see, from then on, the raise of productivity continued to rise to a large extent, and wages just remained stagnant, And I don't think it's a coincidence that workers' protections and unions were had no power anymore since then. So yeah, I do think this is I'm not surprised, and I can imagine this trying to strip away workers' rights will be prominent, especially under this administration in the UK. But yeah, as you said, it all depends on if the EU allows them, if it's within the rules that they set out with the EU. Yeah, exactly. And and last thing I'll say, as you said, when you talk about like stuff like the gig economy, I mean, as you saw recently with Prop 22 in the US, which basically was about those are to counteract a law within California that granted independent contractors like Uber drivers full employment status. And this Prop 22 basically wanted to address that and allow basically certain companies like Uber, for example, to maintain independent contractor, subcontractor type of employment, because basically the business model is dependent on having workers be subcontracted instead of full-time employees. And it worked, and they put millions of dollars into their campaign, and they ended up winning Prop 22. And I think that will just expand throughout the US and the UK. So I mean, As long as there's no, I think, in my eyes, as long as there's no organization like workers' organizations to fight it back against the erosion of workers' rights, I think it will continue to happen. And yeah, but I mean, luckily within the agreement with the EU, there is some pushback on that. So hopefully, I mean, the EU is not perfect, but I think at least in this sense, and with this administration in the UK, it will help push back against those erosions. So yeah, I'm not surprised by this news, and yeah, hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully there's a barrier and it doesn't end up being implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I think as true as it is, it's not a clean record that the UK has in terms of workers' rights. I do think that politically, I know it's slightly ironic to say this when politically and in terms of public opinion and what looks good in the press, they haven't been the most successful recently. I do think that Johnson and his certainly kind of like press team within Number 10 are aware of how it will look if they're wanting to strike trade deals post-Brexit with kind of Germany and similar EU nations. They will need a basic level of workers' rights protections. And I think also there's a lot of pressure from some backbench Conservatives, certainly from Labour, for adequate workers' rights. So I think although they may not be impeccable and they may not necessarily be EU standard, I wouldn't be as quick to kind of say that just personally. I do think that there will be certainly a satisfactory level. With that being said, I think that a key exemption of them will be this gig economy and the informal economy, with what you mentioned in terms of Uber and similar company lawsuits and such. It's certainly an area which is kind of like escaping jurisdiction because they are getting around those protections and what is otherwise like very clearly enshrined in law, because they're subcontracting out and they're having temporary workers, and they're able to use these arguments that workers don't want those same protections. It's not that they don't need them, they just don't want them because like they like 0 hours contracts and they like the freedom that comes with. Never mind the fact that like it's the only job that they can do around kind of childcare responsibilities or caring for elderly relatives or partners. It's the only thing that kind of can fit around them. So that still shouldn't mean that sick pay or holiday pay or kind of childcare pay is negated because of that. It, if anything, should mean that it's protected more. So I think with it being said that I am somewhat confident that there will be certainly a satisfactory level of workers' protections. I think that the key exemption to that, and it's a really big one, is that gig economy. And we're only seeing that increasing with even just kind of like Uber Eats and stuff, especially in the context of COVID. People are ordering online so much more. Amazon drivers, like warehouse staff, it all comes back to that gig informal economy.
What I'll say here is just that for me, like with the whole thing with the I think first of all, it's really important that the UK has to keep in has to have the same standard as the EU. I think that's a really key point, because if that wasn't there, I think there would really be a race to the bottom in the UK, post Brexit, in the sense that like I think we'd be more inclined for a race to the bottom than we are right now. Like there is still that as you point out there, that baseline that they have to kind of stick by. But yeah, I mean, it just erodes on like this whole thing of getting out of the 48-hour work week. It just erodes on, I guess, union work, which has happened for centuries or decades, I guess, which is to do things like shorten the work week, shorten the work day, stuff like that. And yeah, it just isn't looking good optically that we're out of the EU, like a couple of weeks now, and we're already attacking, or trying to move around these workers' rights things.
Yeah, especially with their campaign promises during Brexit. They a lot of the promises were around funding certain social services that are popular within Britain. Like for example, the NHS. Like they claim that Europe and immigrants were basically like stopping, getting in the way of properly funding these services. So I do think, I mean, I don't. Yeah, as you said, it won't look good. The optics are not good for this, especially for their promises, and they kind of they have nowhere to run to now because they made the deal and they've agreed upon the deal with the EU. So they can only blame themselves now for if something goes wrong or services are not at the adequate level that the British people expect. So yeah.
I'll also just say, like, definitely there's a conservative aspect to it, but also, like, I don't see Keir Starmer, for example, really. I don't expect him, just based on his performance with the NEU the other week, right? Not coming out until the same time as Boris Johnson, essentially, to say that, oh, teachers shouldn't go back to school, stuff like that. A point which Boris Johnson, rightfully so, called him out on at Prime Minister's Questions the other week. And, like, it's not like Keir Starmer, as much as he wants to put up this persona, especially when he was running, of, oh, I'm like Corbyn, I have the same policies as him, I want radical change, but I'm just not as rough around the edges or whatever you want to call it. He really isn't like that. So I'm not. I wouldn't imagine that it'd be a massive labor, rebellion against something like this, right? So it's kind of it's kind of more of like what I would see is like a set. Some would have a centrist response to it. I feel like more about optically being for unions than actually policy wise, being for unions, if that makes sense. Like, I wouldn't see him, for example. Sorry, Rachel. I know I'm butting in there, but like, I wouldn't see Keir Starmer, for example, advocating for secondary action to become legal, for example. So secondary action, for those who don't know, is like sympathy strikes in favor for other sectors of the economy, stuff like that. I mean, important to point out as well that secondary strikes being banned would happen before Thatcher's time and stuff like that. That was way before. But anyway, yeah, I'll let you go, Rachel.
Yeah, I think really just a couple of points. Obviously, Starmer, I 100% agree. Like, he really isn't a Corbynista by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that comes certainly from just a necessity of Labour to become electable again. Because whatever you thought of like Corbyn's policies and things and increasing Labour's vote share and so on and so forth, it is that kind of like middle England demographic that Starmer and his press office do seem to be appealing to. So that being said, I think that the Labour backbenches, a lot of MPs would stage some sort of a rebellion, but as you say, if there's kind of three-line whips and things, whether there are enough MPs that are willing to kind of risk their positions within the party, that remains to be seen. Just in terms of the race to the bottom, whether it's kind of a little bit too optimistic, I don't see that happening realistically. I do think that Johnson, for all his kind of bumble and talk, I think that he is aware that a certain kind of level needs to be maintained. And I'm not sure that it would be quite that drastic. I do think that they will petition and legislate to have good workers' rights, because there were some things where, even within the EU, we were petitioning and we had separately. But similarly, it will just be interesting to see, and it certainly remains to be seen, whether it's kind of the same level. In terms of the European Bill of Human Rights, a lot of Conservatives are very keen to kind of get rid of that and have a British Bill of Rights. That's been seen by a lot of people as kind of like going back on those rights that the EU have agreed on. But I think, similar to the workers' rights, it is something that the Conservative Party and Parliament as a whole, because such big issues are kind of Parliament-wide, they will look more favourably on and maintain certainly a base standard.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I'm not expecting us to go back to kind of like
the days of the workhouse.
Yeah, like I'm not going back to like the 1800s where like we're gonna get 5-year-olds into mining or manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
But no, I just mean like subpar to what the EU would be. But yeah, I guess it is remains to be seen. Whether, well, first of all, I'm interested to see what the EU's actual reaction to these to any proposal will be, because they made it quite clear, I feel like, in the Brexit negotiations that they don't want the single market to be at any point undermined. So we'll see. I'm interested to see how that dynamic plays out. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I was going to agree with Rachel before you clarified. I think, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be so dramatic to say that it's a race to the bottom. But yeah, I mean, with this Brexit negotiation, it does give the UK a bit more wiggle room to, especially in this case, maybe undermine workers' rights and protection. So yeah, I mean, I think the British public there is a limit, there is a standard to what the public accepts. But I don't think, yeah, as I said, it just gives it more wiggle room to maybe create subpar conditions in comparison to Europe, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, so on the topic of Keir Starmer, centrist politics, all that jazz, I thought it would be nice to do a quick detour into essentially an article that came out by the Sunday Times, which was discussing how Scottish Labour, the leader of Scottish Labour, had resigned. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I think I briefly told Samuel. I don't know if Rachel, you've seen it. But yeah, so the head of Scottish Labour, essentially Richard Leonard, he resigned, and this is basically, it's kind of crazy, this whole story, because his resignation followed a conference call involving senior party figures and potential donors, who said that they would not back Labour in terms of donations if Leonard didn't resign. And then 24 hours after that call, he resigned. So I think this is significant for a number of reasons. First of all, the idea of having people like Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer, in these different calls, dictating to Scottish Labour or kind of trying to coerce them into taking certain actions is definitely like interesting in its own right. Like they shouldn't. What Scottish Labour, although you should say that it's not doing well. For example, they shouldn't really be kind of influencing what they're doing, because it's devolved, or at least somewhat, if I'm not mistaken. Secondly, the idea of donors dictating party leadership, or the fact that or something along those lines, is really a bad look for Labour and Keir Starmer in general. And it goes back to what we've spoken about previously about Keir Starmer being like similar to Blair in some ways with regards to private donors and things like that. Keir Starmer, we know, was looking to raise £5 million for election funds, things like that, and he was going to old donors from the Blair era to try to get this money. And yeah, it just and this is also following unions like Unite, which have cut Labour donations by 10%. And so the whole shift away from kind of more organized Labour donation and grassroots donation to more private donations doesn't fit well with a party whose identity should be based around protecting workers, right? So it just goes into the hypocrisy of kind of Keir Starmer, and I guess in some sense some of the left, or some of those who are fanboys of Keir Starmer and kind of his more centrist politics or right-leaning politics, however you want to characterize it, who don't want to criticize him for taking private donations, but have no problem criticizing the conservatives for it, right? Like, you have to be fair in that regard. Like, I don't like when conservatives take big money private donations, at the same way that Keir Starmer should not be relying on that to fund his campaigns and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if you guys have any opinions on it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously those donations do go to something that like your average kind of Labour voter would find effective, in saying that without that money they can't operate the campaigns and they can't send that money to those kind of swing seats and constituencies, whether that's trying to regain that red wall that's now the blue wall and things like that. So as much as it's not maybe a nice thought to think of these very well-off people at dinners kind of sending checks to the parties, it is part of the UK political system. And unless the Electoral Commission kind of like set up or further the calls that they've already made for like a completely transparent kind of state-funded political regime, then you will always have those donations. But I do agree. I think Labour members need to be more vocal in calling Starmer out for that, and that example, especially because they're certainly very keen to with the Conservative Party, and rightly so. You know, it's something that just needs to be in the public eye. Who is donating? Why is that? And do they have hidden agendas? And are those agendas then suddenly becoming government policy, like a few months down the line, coincidentally? So it's certainly something I think that isn't covered enough in the media, and that's a whole other conversation to have.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I do understand Rachel's point of view. I mean, talking about like the reality of, you know, campaign funding and, you know, in the current system in the UK, I guess it is the easier way, I suppose, to you know, fund different the Labour Party as a bigger party, but also the municipalities and local elections. But yeah, I mean, and from my point of view, I think, I mean, you can say what you want about Corbyn and his policies, but you had a strong grassroots base, you know, that I think, you know, Keir Starmer should have at least tried to build upon that, you know, maybe get people who perhaps didn't like Corbyn because of his, you know, he's maybe more rough around the edges. Try to get people who like, you know, maybe he's like more presidential style, and build upon that grassroots base, you know, not just revert back to the Blairite days of, you know, just relying on big funders, because you did have a base of enthusiastic supporters. So I think you should have tried at least to compromise a bit to them, you know, not completely, but somewhat, you know, to try to keep them involved. But yeah, I mean, also talking about the realities of elections, I think this also goes to a bigger topic of, you know, the compatibility between, you know, democracy and capitalism, you know, because, you know, when you have a system like where, you know, a company's power gives them a seat at the table in governance, and then money, you know, really has an influence on the policies of both parties. And alongside money in politics, you also have money outside of politics. So say, for example, if there is a popular legislation that passes, or that wants to, like, you know, that is like has the potential to pass, you know, that, you know, for example, like increases labor protections or rises wages, like a company, a big, like a powerful company can just say, well, if you want to do that, then I'll just move my company abroad, and how many jobs are going to be lost because of that? And that kind of makes a lot of people in government reluctant to pass popular legislation. So money in and outside of politics does play a role. And, you know, the reason why a lot of these companies have this power is because of capitalism. So I think there is something to be said about, you know, our economic system and its relationship with democracy, because yeah, it is hard to depend fully on a grassroots campaign when the other party can just get millions from a donor. It's hard to compete with that, and I understand that. But yeah, I definitely think reforms need to be done in, you know, electoral politics, and try to do some sort of ban on money outside of politics. But also you have to look at the power structures within the society.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly on the Keir Starmer point in terms of him not building on the grassroots, like 100% correct. And also, you know, with Keir Starmer, we've had a exodus of labor, you know, registered, you know, labor members and things like that under his leadership. So it's not even that like he's maintained the base, right? He's like actively, you know, that base has actually declined. So, you know, and as a consequence of his lack of enthusiasm, I would say, or lack of stances, or lack of lack of just, I don't know, his policy proposals have just been very weak, or lack thereof any policy proposal, shall I say, apart from adopting Marcus Rashford's, you know, own campaign. And just on the broader point, the idea of money in politics and stuff, it's like, I think it's pretty easy. It's really conceptually easy to see how it may not be a good idea if we allow loads of private donors to give money to these political parties, like on all sides of the aisle, right and left, because it all can be manipulated in you know, in the wrong way. So yeah, just I guess legislation towards that, or some way. Like I see a lot of people, more right wing leaning figures, instead of saying they want to get money out of politics completely, they want to, I think, as you said, Rachel, like make it fully transparent. And like, to me, that seems like such a weird half measure, because it's like, oh, we don't actually want to stop, the funding which is making these parties do these certain things. We're just going to make sure that everyone knows who's donating to them. Like, it's not going to stop people from donating, right? It's just gonna make it more clear who it is. And it just, that for me, doesn't seem like politics is the area of society to have a half measure like that, when it is so impactful, as we've seen, on so many people's lives.
Yeah, I agree. I think more than a half measure, it's just good if there is transparency around who's donating, because as we've said, like, it then does often correlate with policies, in terms of if like prominent housing developers suddenly give the Conservative Party a huge donation, as we've seen, there are then kind of subcontracts to the same private firms for like the building of social housing and things just a few months later. So I think it is effective to have more transparency in the system. But yeah, I would agree, it's a very kind of tricky situation, because if you say that, okay, political parties, the only money that they can make is from, say, memberships and like small level kind of just double figure donations from the membership and membership fees, then there's this huge gap in the funding. And then if you say, well, that's plugged by the state, well, what about people that are just politically not engaged and they don't want their taxes to go on the campaign expenses of an MP kind of like 200 miles from where they live? So it is very difficult if you eliminate the kind of private donations. But I think, yeah, I would agree, and just kind of transparency is certainly needed in that process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fair enough. I'm not trying to say as well that like transparency is like inherently bad. I'm just saying that
No, no.
personally, it's just, I don't feel like it goes far enough.
Yeah, I think it still doesn't address the issues of having to shape policy around donors, because you might like I mean, for example, in the U.S. There are websites that expose donors, and you can see who donates, but it still hasn't done much to address money in politics and that whole issue in America. So, but obviously, I mean, definitely wouldn't hinder those measures wouldn't hinder anything, and it would help. It would help towards better understanding donations. But yeah, as Benji said, maybe it should go further, in my opinion. But
Yeah, before we go on to Samuel's kind of section as well, I'll come back to you, Rachel, as well, if you want to add something else just before we round this up. But I just also, would want to show, well, I guess discuss briefly that Labour already has had a really bad, as we alluded to before, really bad, um, relationship with big private donors under the Blair era. And one really clear example of this was with the Cash for Honor scandal, which was 2006, right? So I mean, I guess I was quite young when this all unfolded, but I can read back on it. And so in 2006, Blair got a bunch of money from £5 million, I believe, from these four wealthy business people, whatever it may be, and he nominated them all for peerage. And like, that's an exact, like, that shows how the stuff can lead to I'll give you a little bit of money, okay, you get this in return. It's a really clear example of that. And so yeah, just again, I would say, if you're going to be against money in politics and all that kind of stuff, then you must be consistent about it and just say, and when the Conservatives do it, that's bad. When Labour does it, that's bad as well. That's my final remarks on the
for
thing.
sure.
I'd say.
For sure.
Anything you
Yeah,
else want to add?
I was just going to add, in terms of Cash for Honours, like, the only good thing that did come out of that was because there was like such huge public outrage with the peerage system and with the party donation system. The Independent Electoral Commission, a lot of the kind of donation rules and regulations we see now wouldn't have happened and wouldn't have been in place if it wasn't for what happened under Blair. So that's like one positive to come out of the situation. So you could, I suppose, legitimately assume that if there's like more similar outrages, then like further legislation will be put in place. And whether that goes far enough is a kind of another topic, really.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, do you want to go with the Ugandan elections, I guess?
Yeah. So yeah, we can turn our attention to more international perspective, and yeah, I wanted to focus on Uganda because on Thursday they recently held their elections. Uganda has been independent from the UK since 1962, but they have yet to have a peaceful transition to power since then. Museveni, who is part of the national resistance movement, has been in power since 1986 after overthrowing Idi Amin and Milton Obote. And in this particular elections, he was up against Robert Kigulanyi Sitanamu. I'm sure I butchered that name, but his more well-known name is Bobby Wine, who is a well-known singer and leader of the party People Power, Our Power. And one of the main reasons why he initially wanted to run, because Museveni wanted to change something in the constitution, because in the constitution, basically, you're not allowed to be in power after 75 years old, and he wanted to change that as he recently turned 76. So that was one of the main reasons why he ran against him. And throughout this election campaign, there's been a lot of civil violations and outright aggression from Museveni and his government. For example, Bobby Wine has been arrested twice, and one of the arrests, Museveni and the government said it was because of COVID-19 restrictions, but it's obviously those more ulterior motives to that. And also, one of these arrests sparked a riot, and those riots led to 54 deaths from protesters. So you see a large scale violence and repression of opposition parties. So yeah, I mean, and on the day of the elections, they did vote, but however, and at the end of the day, it came up that Museveni won. But there's a large amount of doubts, to put it nicely, that that there was not fair play in the elections, and there was a large amount of voter tampering.
He was under house arrest as well.
Yeah. I'll talk about that soon. And also, as you said, he has displayed the fear for his life, and he said that he was in house arrest. So, as you can see on the tweets on the screen, he wrote, "We are under siege. The military has jumped over the fence and now has taken control of our home." He goes on to say, in another tweet, "It's now 4 days since the military surrounded our home and placed my wife and I under house arrest. We have run out of food and supplies. When my wife tried to pick food from the garden yesterday, she was blocked and assaulted by the soldiers staged in our compound." And that was written by an admin. And lastly, he wrote another tweet today, actually, which said, "Everyone, including media and my party officials, are restricted from accessing me. At Zaik Francis was arrested outside my gate as he made his way to my house. He was badly beaten by soldiers. He is now in Rabunga Hospital." And that was written by admin again. So it seems like one of his people in his party tried to access him, and he ended up getting beaten. So as you can see, it is a horrible situation in Uganda. And yeah, obviously I send my solidarity to the Ugandan people and Bobby Wine himself. However, as this world is globalized and interconnected, I do want to talk about how Museveni is being propped up largely by the West, and especially the US. And it is just a part of a major theme, of the core countries that are wealthy, who support regimes who oftentimes are corrupt. But if they suit their interests in the global supply chain, they are willing to look away from a lot of these violations of human rights. So actually, Bobby Wine himself, he recently wrote in Foreign Affairs in an article titled "The West Helped Cripple Uganda's Democracy." So I'm going to read a few quotes from what he said. So he said, "It pains me to say this, but the international community is part of our enduring problem in Uganda. Over the years, Museveni has managed to position himself as the military ally and development darling of many Western governments that look the other way when it comes to this horrendous human rights record. And then he goes on to say, "Museveni also embraced neoliberal economic reforms that have been hard on the poor, but endeared him to institutions such as the World Bank." Then he also goes on to say, "In nearly 35 years in power, Museveni's government has received tens of billions of dollars in direct foreign aid from Western countries, including the United States and multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Much of this money has been properly spent on projects such as AIDS treatment and malaria prevention, but much of this has also been siphoned off by Museveni's henchmen." He also went on to talk about how the military budget has massively increased over the past 30 years, and he's also Museveni's cultivated an image of bringing military stability in East Africa, and that kind of uses an excuse to, you know, receive so much funding from these agencies. So yeah, as I mentioned previously, I think, you know, because, you know, the Western world, a lot of the time we bring up, you know, the reason we intervene in countries is because of human rights and anti-democratic practices. But as you can see, you know, when countries such as Uganda do play along within the global institutions like the IMF or the World Bank, and, you know, are receptive to their loans and the programs that they that they implement on these countries in order to pay back the debt. A lot of, you know, the major powers are willing to look the other way when it comes to human rights violations. So yeah, I think it's just another display of, you know, of this, you know, control from core countries who are, you know, who have the wealth, and peripheral countries who basically, you know, they basically uphold these countries through, you know, cheap labor, for example. So I just think that's another example. That's another reason why, you know, there's so many countries in the global south, like South America, East Asia, who try to look for an alternative route of development, who have had hybrid wars on them for decades, who've had sanctions on them. So yeah, I think this is just another example of, you know, how the human rights excuse for intervention is not, it doesn't really hold up, you know, in the real world, and it's more about it's a lot about who challenges Western power and their idea of development.
Yeah, I also say like this, in terms of, you know, there's been also rejection from a lot of these countries, especially in South America, from these other like more international organizations because of this impact of kind of indirect controlling their economy and stuff. You see, you know, in like Bolivia, for example, is part of a organization which is essentially a South American rival to the IMF, and things like that. But just quickly, I mean, I'm not too much of an expert on Ugandan politics or anything like that. But from the little that I do know, Bobby Wine has been also subject to a lot of to torture, I believe, from the Ugandan military and things like that over the past couple of years. And so, yeah, just in terms of just he's really gone through the ringer, I guess, in that respect. So yeah, that's all I really have to say on this. But yeah, definitely carries on from a legacy of Western interventionism in the global south and all around the world, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think with Uganda especially, it's like it's refreshing in a way that he's just 38 years old, Bobby Wine, so half the incumbents' age, and he's got this vision, and it's certainly captivated a lot of the population. We obviously don't know the exact figures, and the government are very keen not to release exact figures, or if we do, they can certainly be open to some interpretation. But I think just going on that kind of like globalized outlook as well, Bobby Wine has explicitly linked his campaign in interviews to other similar efforts across Africa, telling the Observer that his movement towards leadership was a generational cause. He cited that oppressed peoples cannot stay oppressed forever, and if history has taught us anything, it's that brutal dictators, which again he's kind of describing the current regime in Uganda have crumbled to the power of the people. So it's a wide campaign that he's linking to kind of the continent as a whole, and obviously those geopolitical kind of events are very, very different in Uganda to elsewhere. But I think that theme that you've both picked up on, of kind of examining these events in some kind of a world systems theory, where you do have these periphery countries that are very kind of like mineral rich, or very rich in terms of their produce, whether that's like coffee or cocoa and things like that, they feed the core countries, and whether that's the US and then backing them and kind of propping up what can really be described as dictators, you know, in terms of his efforts to change the constitution, as we were mentioning. So I think that's really interesting. In terms of, again, just going on the fact that he is now certainly under some kind of house arrest. I was just watching on the BBC World Service. journalists trying to interview him and ask him what his opinions of the kind of campaign results are so far. The preliminary rounds, they're just kind of citing that it's another kind of huge success for the government at the time. But even access to Bobby Wine in his house is being blocked. The interview I saw, they managed to kind of speak to some military personnel, and they were just highlighting how it was actually for Bobby Wine's own security, and that's why they were there. They were purely there in a kind of like protectionist role, which obviously I don't think anyone believes, but it's certainly scary that he has kind of democratically stood up and would have, he said, been completely willing to accept defeat, you know, if that is what had happened. And as you were saying, he's been subject to years of kind of intimidation at the least, violence at the worst, and is now in arrest in his own home. So it really is a grave situation, and I think it will be interesting to see how things pan out, because I think even if kind of Wine goes somewhat quietly, which I don't think he will, it will certainly, I think, be the kind of catalyst for similar movements in Uganda. Like, there have been so many similar movements in the continent before now, but yeah, he's certainly trying to kind of highlight this in the wider movement and that generational cause.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I also forgot to mention that actually one of his bodyguards actually got shot and killed. So yeah, it just shows the extent to how the repression and the violence that's been, you know, taking place on his supporters and his him and his party. So yeah, so just it's a crazy story, and as you said, Rachel, I think it is inspiring that he also has linked it to various struggles in the African continent. So I think hopefully, you know, I don't think he will back down, but hopefully nothing too serious happens to him, and hopefully he can continue to, you know, spread his message, and hopefully, you know, enough international pressure allows him to, you know, to have at least, at the very least, like a more transparent election. So
Yeah. You know what? I actually do want to say, like, it speaks to like the asymmetry between how the media covers some like the West and I guess the South and things like that. Because imagine if, you know, during the election, Trump sent the National Guard to surround where Biden was staying and and have him under house arrest for 4 days. I mean, like, actually imagine the uproar that would happen, and like everyone would be calling Trump a fascist, dictator, all that stuff, and rightly so. And yet, you know, the same coverage is just not mirrored for countries like Uganda, for example. And you know, there's a lot of things that go into that, but I would say, because it is, I guess, of interest to you know, I guess like the UK, for example, or the US, where, you know, they benefited from these countries kind of being their you know, being their source of income and, you know, proliferation, I guess, in some sense. And yeah, I mean, I'll just say that as well. I mean, for an example as to which countries really or companies, I guess, really benefit from I guess this U.S. Western European kind of imperialism or New Age imperialism. I just want to point out that, like, Tesla, for example, you know, a lot of their lithium they get is from the Congo, I believe, and you know, over there it's not exact. It's, you know, they're having kids mine, you know, or extract all these minerals and stuff, which is horrendous. So just one example of that. And yeah, definitely your analysis of the periphery supporting, you know, some of these the more internal countries, I guess, like the US, UK, other parts of Europe, is definitely spot on.
Yeah.
But should we do you have anything else before we move on, Rachel? Or
Yeah, just two kind of super quick points on that. Like, obviously Tesla as well, not being the only company in terms of, if you're looking at like the Congo and mineral mining, like iPhones, laptops, is like every Apple product from there. But just in terms of what you were saying, if kind of like Biden was somehow under house arrest, it links. I've just finished reading a book by John Sopel, who's the BBC's North America kind of correspondent, and he wrote a book, I think it was last year, entitled If Only They Didn't Speak English, and it was about covering the past 4 years in Washington and Trump's presidency, and people just not being able to understand, like, him kind of doing all these crazy irrational decisions. And us, especially reporting back to a UK audience, we kind of see ourselves mirrored a lot in America and the American dream and kind of all these ideals. And I think that this just filters in so well in terms of the lack of coverage that it's getting. It's just seen as like, oh, it's another kind of coup. It's another like dictatorship. It's another undemocratic election. And yeah, it's absolutely crazy, but it's just not given the same level of kind of media attention, although it completely 100% should be. And it's not like characteristic of the continent, and it shouldn't be seen to be. But that was the only thing I will say, and also to recommend that book. It was very interesting.
Right. I want to say one more thing. I don't want to dive onto like a whole different tangent about Trump and like Trumpism and all that stuff. But like just kind of building a little bit what you said, like the fact that Trump got away with so many crazy things, like is something we're going to all have to come to terms with, because with the whole Georgia runoff races, he committed essentially another impeachable offense with that whole thing before he got impeached for the Capitol riots, in terms of trying to coerce the Secretary of State in Georgia to overturn election results. Okay, we'll move on, because that's a whole different conversation for a different day.
Yeah.
But yeah, Sam will take it away with the $2,000 checks.
Yeah. Okay. So this is our last story, and it's more about the recent I would say controversy, but yeah, definitely a debate around Joe Biden and his American Rescue Plan, which is a bill to address the containment of coronavirus and the economic recovery of this fallout. Yeah, the overall cost of this plan will be around $1.9 trillion, and it will address multiple issues such as employment benefits, rental aid, expanding childcare, and the direct payments, which was initially slated to be $2,000. And I'm not going to go into detail of all of these different aspects, but a lot of it is expanding on already established programs, or just additional funding, for example. So, or expanding the dates of it. But I wanted to focus on the direct payments, because that was the big issue. Because, for example, leading up to the Georgia elections, as you said, the big issue was around the $2,000 direct payment, and Ossoff and Warnock, they both ran on the direct $2,000 payment, saying that if they both won, that direct payment will be sent directly to every home in America as soon as they become in office. But in this recent deal, they've actually cut the direct payment from $2,000 to $1,400 in dollars in direct payment, and this has caused a lot of uproar between more centrist Democrats and more of the progressive Justice Democrats. I'll personally say for myself, I think this definitely, the optics of this U-turn is not a good look, because, as I said before, the Georgian runoffs, both of those candidates relied on the $2,000 check as the main message for voting for them. As you can see on the screen above, you can see Warnock's advertisement, where he said, "Want a $2,000 check? #vote Warnock." Yeah. So it's clear that was one of the main issues ahead of the elections. So yeah, as I said, it's kind of created a backlash with the progressive and centrist Democrats. Like, for example, Cory Bush tweeted, 1,400 does not equal 2,000 on Twitter. And then AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also responded to that. She responded to a tweet from Jeff Stein, who works at the Washington Post, who said, Rep. Ocasio-Cortez says Dems should pass 2K on top of the 600 from December, rather than add 1,400 to get 600 to 2K. And then in the quotations, $2,000 means $2,000. 2,000 does not mean 1,400, AOC tells us. And then she adds on to that comment saying unemployment benefits should be retroactive too. So yeah, this definitely shows in disagreement within the party. And a lot of the centrist justification for this is that it's just the 1,400 is to add on to the 1,600, which will then in turn
the 600.
Yeah, this will in turn equal to $2,000, which we promised. But as you can see throughout the donations, I mean, throughout the elections and the runoffs, even after the $600 payment was passed, they still said 2,000. Another 2,000 will be passed. So I think they're definitely going back on their word, and yeah, it does. I don't think it looks good on their part to backtrack, and it just gives the Republicans more ammo to aim at them. But yeah, what do you guys think of that whole issue right now?
I'll just say quick, it's important to point out as well that obviously we're very welcoming of this $1,400 check going to these Americans because it's the debate, like the way that the debate's been framed in the U.S. is like absurd. In the UK we've had furlough, so the government, well, I guess has been the amount the government has been paying for the wage, each company for their wages and stuff. It varied over time, but at least for the first couple of months of the pandemic, the government was covering up to 80% of the wages, right? And during this with the furlough scheme, and the U.S. they had a one was it $1,000 payment or $2,000 payment in the first for the first stimulus check.
I think was it 1,000?
1,200 maybe it was. And anyway, regardless, not enough. A one-time payment, and now they've gotten to this point, gotten a $600 payment as well. But for months and months and months, people haven't had any payment. They've been laid off. The U.S. reached the highest unemployment in the pandemic of around 40 million, which is unreal, unbelievable numbers. And it's framed between, oh, are we going to give them just literally $600 more, like $1,400 more, and like that whole debate's absurd. So yeah, I would just say they've ran on $2,000. If they want it to look good, they want to show how if you vote for Democrats you'll actually get things, they should stick with the $2,000. And yeah, so that's what I'll say on that front.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the same. I don't have a huge amount to add, just apart from the fact that, as you're saying, if they're running on a pledge and a promise, then like they have to deliver on this. They have a short kind of period of time to really capture like the media and public opinion within those first days in office. And I think if already we're seeing U-turns or like equivocation on what they actually meant, what the exact figure was when you kind of like consider everything, then it's not a good look and it's not going to buy them faith. And just being purely the alternative to Trump, it will not be enough when in office. So yeah, I mean, I agree with kind of everything you've both said on that.
Yeah,
point.
that is what you said there is spot on. And the Democrats, like, they have to really understand that they've got to they can't just have this half measure of as you said, just being the alternative to Trump. They're gonna have to build their own identity, and the Biden presidency, if it wants to actually escape this whole Trump entanglement with Trump, I guess, which we see now, and which Biden has said, look, we want to move on from. They're gonna have to build their own identity from just being the alternative, as you point out. Yeah. Also, adding on to that, Republicans had a pretty, quite a field day trying to paint out Biden as some communist socialist who's going to destroy the U.S., all that kind of stuff. And what are they going to be saying when he's already, before even trying to get into office, before getting into office, he's already trying to, trying to regress on things, on more progressive policies, which he's advocated before previously. So also that's a whole other aspect of this, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to add, but yeah, it's just crazy to think like, it just doesn't. I don't know why they would want to backtrack on the recent promise, especially after all these months of hardly any support for the American people, financially speaking. So yeah, I just don't think. I don't know. Yeah, the optics are not good, as I said, and yeah, I think this is an issue that's going to face the U.S. and the U.K. With finding the leadership, finding their identity and how to channel the conservative party, respective conservative parties, and yeah, I think the stakes are quite high in this sense, because if Joe Biden sticks to how the Democrats have functioned since Bill Clinton, for example, I don't think it's going to be successful in turning people away from Trump and towards perhaps more the Democratic Party, for example. So I mean, they definitely need to think of a strategy to how to push their cause and actually have strong opinions on certain issues and state their claim. Because I mean, in this climate, if you don't properly address these issues, then there's going to be more and more resentment towards the party in power. So they Starmer and Biden alike, they need to think of this problem they face.
Yeah, definitely. If Rachel, you have nothing else to add, then I guess that is Systems Reimagined, episode 4, completed. Thank you guys all for watching. Again, if you enjoyed the podcast, the episode, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and we'll see you guys all really, really soon. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you.